My name is Juliana Brooks. I'm 32 years old, living in Seattle, and I used to be the lead engineer at a tech company I had poured my entire youth into helping build. But that afternoon, just hours after I helped the company secure a multi-million-dollar contract, the CEO called me into his office, smiled, and handed me my termination letter. No explanation. No words of gratitude. Just a cold line: "You can pack your things today." Have you ever been betrayed by a place you thought was your second home? Have you ever had your name erased from your own work like you never existed? If what I'm about to share feels familiar, leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to the channel. Because this story isn't just about me. It's the truth that too many of us are quietly carrying. I remember vividly the first day I stepped into the cramped basement behind a coffee shop on South Jackson Street. That was where NovaForge began. No desks, no air conditioning, just rickety wooden chairs, a few old hard drives, and a group of engineers dreaming of building a game-changing cybersecurity platform. I didn't care about the lack of windows or climate control. Back then, I believed I was part of something bigger. Something my father, a former software engineer, would have been proud of if he were still alive to see it. At the time, I had one car, a 2008 Honda Civic I used to drive home every weekend to visit my mom in Tacoma. But when Brian, the CEO, said we urgently needed a dedicated server for testing and the funding hadn't come through yet, I didn't hesitate. I sold the car, left the keys with my mother, and walked nearly 30 minutes from the light rail station to the basement every day. "You're crazy, Juliana," Ethan, my colleague and only close friend at the time, whispered when he saw me come in soaked from the rain, my coat dripping wet. "That's your only means of transportation." I just shrugged. "You think HydroShield can run stable on that old busted server?" Ethan looked at me and shook his head. "You act like work is the only thing that matters." I smiled. "I don't live for work. I live to build something that matters. Everything else is just details." And I held on to that belief even long after things stopped being what I thought they were. HydroShield started as a side project. I came up with it on a sleepless night, dealing with the side effects of medication. I never told anyone, but I live with an autoimmune disease, lupus, and there are days when I can't even sit up straight from the pain. But I kept it to myself. I didn't want to be seen as a burden. In tech, where everything moves fast and everyone watches performance like a hawk, I refused to look weak. So I stayed up late more often, swapped pain meds for coffee, and coded HydroShield with trembling hands. That system was my personal creation, 6 months in the making. A multi-layered security framework using dynamic behavioral authentication, something that, at the time, was nearly non-existent in the market. And the most important part, I built it entirely from scratch. No open-source libraries. No commercial templates. Every line was mine. When I showed Brian the demo, he was quiet for a long time. Then he turned to me, eyes gleaming. This is something we could sell to the government," he murmured. I nodded silently. I hadn't thought that far. I just wanted to build something that truly protected data. 2 months later, NovaForge landed a $12 million defense contract. HydroShield was the reason. My name didn't appear in the contract, nor was it mentioned in the company's PR statement. But Brian promised. "We're going to have a major funding round soon," he said one late night when we were the only ones left in the office. "You'll get equity then." "I promise." I stared out the foggy window, unsure. "I'm not doing this for equity, Brian." He put his hand on my shoulder, gave it a slight squeeze. "But you deserve the recognition." And I believed him. I thought he really valued me. I never complained about late-night system failures or last-minute bug fixes. Even during flare-ups, I hid the meds in my desk drawer, coded while hooked to N4 drip. No one at the company knew. Only my mom, who always sent short texts. "How are you today?" And I always answered, "I'm good, Mom. Doing what I love." I loved that job. I loved seeing my system defend against real-world threats. I loved how my teammates relied on me as a technical anchor in the middle of chaos. But I was essential. Until one day I wasn't invited to meetings. I was removed from internal emails. My code was overwritten and some files were suddenly read-only. I asked Liam, the backend lead. He just shrugged. "I heard Derek's rewriting the HydroShield core. Brian says your method isn't optimal anymore." I didn't react. I stayed silent, stepped back, and observed. Sometimes, You let people trip over their own arrogance to realize the truth. But I also started preparing. Quietly. Patiently. What I didn't know was that the next fall wouldn't just be theirs. It would be mine too, but in an entirely different way. I used to think I was smart enough to tell who was genuine and who wasn't. But maybe, trust is a kind of miscalculation everyone has to make at least once in their life. I met Derek when NovaForge had only 11 people. He was the new DevOps guy, tall, quiet, always moving like he didn't want to disturb the air around him. We didn't start anything dramatic. Just late-night work hours overlapping, sharing cold ramen, and then one day I noticed he always glanced over whenever I coughed from exhaustion. We never went public. Back then, NovaForge didn't even have HR, but in a startup, rumors spread faster than any data packet. I didn't want our personal story to become breakroom gossip. When Brian hired Derek, I didn't suspect a thing. I even joked, finally, someone in this team who knows how to use Bash properly. Derek smiled, cheeks flushing. I thought it was modesty. We were together for over a year. No grand memories, no dramatic fights. Derek was gentle, attentive, and always willing to listen to me ramble about kernel updates or new network models. I thought, amid all the noise outside, he was my calm. Until the coldness in his eyes became hard to ignore. Shorter texts. Morning hugs disappeared. And those busy deploying excuses started falling exactly on our weekends together. I didn't jump to conclusions. I've always been someone who waits for evidence. And then it came. One Monday morning, I received an anonymous email from a strange address. The subject line had only 4 words: "Listen to this." I hesitated, then opened the attachment. It was a 10-minute audio recording, clear voices of Derek and Brian in a private meeting room. Faint echo. A tapping on the table. Then Derek's voice. "She hasn't suspected anything yet?" Brian chuckled dryly. "No. She's too busy saving the server last week. Typical Juliana, so buried in work she forgets herself." Derek's voice dropped. "I still don't feel right about this." "Derek," Brian interrupted, "you need to remember the goal here: growth. HydraShield can't rely on one person forever. You think the board will approve a security framework only one person understands." Derek fell silent. A glass was set down. "She needs to be replaced," Brian continued. "We'll bring in the advisory team from Boston. Ease Juliana out of the project gradually. Just start pulling away. Don't let her catch on too soon." I didn't listen to the rest. I turned off the speakers and sat frozen in my chair. My screen still glowed, but it was no longer the familiar light of debugging code. My mind was filled with a heavy, ringing silence. I leaned back, hollow inside. I didn't know which hurt more, being betrayed emotionally or professionally. Probably both, tangled like 2 malicious scripts running simultaneously in the same system. I thought of the nights I stayed up until 3 a.m. writing code so Derek could deploy on time. The times I brought him coffee from his favorite little shop even while running a fever. I thought of last year's Christmas party when he gave me a gray wool scarf and said, "Whenever you're tired, wrap this around yourself and remember you're not alone." Turns out I'd always been alone. I just hadn't realized it. Ethan saw me in the pantry that day, face pale and eyes red. He didn't ask anything, just handed me a hot cup of tea and said softly, "Whatever happened, you're still the one who built HydraShield. No one can take that from you." I nodded, holding on to that cup like it was the last remaining warmth of trust one had left. That day I asked to leave early. Not because I was sick, but because I knew if I stayed I wouldn't be able to hold it together. I needed time to gather the broken pieces before I faced whatever was coming next. But from that moment on, I also knew I couldn't stay silent forever. And if they were playing chess, maybe it was time I moved a piece too. I didn't leave NovaForge in panic. On the contrary, I left in silence, with a strategy. They thought I was fragile because I was a woman. They thought I was forgettable because I smiled gently and never raised my voice. But I didn't enter tech on feelings. I entered with logic, and above all, I knew how to protect myself. Ever since HydraShield was integrated into the official system, I had been quietly archiving every original design draft, every early prototype, every crucial line of code I'd written since my senior year at MIT. Back then, I just thought I needed a safe space to store my work. But now that archive had become my only shield. I used an offline computer to store it all, encrypted with a triple-layered algorithm I wrote myself. I also had a physical backup secured with a legal deposit. It reminded me of my father. He once taught me how to build redundancy checks for my senior project. No one should have the power to erase your name from what you've created, he'd said. I reached out to my family's former attorney, Carla Jameson, a woman in her 50s who spoke slowly but had eyes sharp as blades. We met at a small cafe near the Westlake station. HydraShield is NovaForge's intellectual property, right? Carla asked after I laid everything out. The part developed after I signed the contract, yes, I replied. But the core, the original kernel, I wrote during college. Before I ever met Brian. Carla leaned back, arms crossed. Do you have proof? I pulled a small external drive from my bag and placed it on the table, then opened an old GitHub page on my phone. Even though my account was private, the commits were time-stamped clearly, going back nearly 7 years. He stared at the screen for a moment, then smiled. Smart. Very few engineers keep records like this. Who taught you? My dad, I said softly. He once got his name stripped from a major project because he had no proof. I promised myself I'd never let that happen to me. Carla nodded with approval. Then leave the rest to me. But in the meantime, stay quiet. Don't go public. The more they think you've walked away, the sloppier they'll get. I returned to my small apartment in Fremont, once just a place I crashed at after long nights. Everything felt oddly quiet now, without dozens of emails per hour or back-to-back meetings. But the silence didn't unsettle me. It helped me reclaim something I hadn't felt in years: autonomy. I started picking up small cybersecurity contracts from startups in the area. Companies no one had heard of yet, but with real promise. One edtech startup asked me to consult on access control systems. A small e-commerce platform wanted help building better data protection for internal users. I chose every project carefully. Not for the money, but for the principle. I only worked with people who genuinely respected engineers and didn't put profit over ethics. Around that time, I reconnected with a few old colleagues from NovaForge. Not all of them knew what had happened. But Ethan, the same DevOps guy from back then, now freelancing, was the first to reach out. I'm sorry, Ethan texted one late night while I was debugging a client module. I should have spoken up when I saw them restructuring the system. I felt like you were being shut out. I didn't blame him. Everyone has their own fears. But I also knew people like Ethan, those who still felt guilt, were the hope for this industry. We started working on small side projects together. No pressure, no overblown expectations. Just two engineers trying to rebuild trust in a profession we once loved. I realized, despite the betrayal, I had never fallen out of love with the work. I just needed to start over, with people who didn't carry hidden knives. Every line of code I wrote became more than just technical solutions. They were quiet affirmations that I was still here, still valuable, and I didn't need anyone's validation but my own. And buried deep in that encrypted drive, the files still waited, silent but ready to speak, if they ever crossed the line again. I didn't expect it all to unravel so quickly. Just 3 weeks after I left NovaForge, the first signs surfaced. A former colleague sent me a Slack message with a short note. You need to see this. The post on DevPulse, a major tech forum, had a blunt title: Is HydraShield falling apart? I clicked the link and felt a chill as I read the first lines. An anonymous contractor claimed that ever since the new team took over, they couldn't figure out how the internal security system worked. Authentication indexes disappeared randomly, encryption sequences failed, and access sessions were misidentified. The final lines were especially telling. Honestly, it feels like this system was built by someone who could only operate it if they were sitting at the keyboard themselves. I sat frozen at the screen. That was HydraShield. And they had touched the core. The part no one but me understood. When I left, I handed over everything required by contract. But what they didn't have, and never asked for, was the detailed mapping of how the algorithms behaved in different scenarios. I wrote that for myself over 2 years. My language was non-standard, blending personal notation, custom syntax, and a logic framework only I could decipher. NovaForge never asked me to turn it over. Maybe they believed their new team was good enough. Or maybe they truly thought I didn't matter that much. But technology doesn't have loyalty. It only responds to those who understand it. A few days later, I got an email from Ethan. I can't say much, but you should know. The defense client just pulled out of the contract. I didn't need to ask further. That deal was NovaForge's lifeline. Without it, their financial foundation would crumble. And the most shocking part? No one but me knew why the system failed. On tech forums and social media, the chatter was exploding. Who owns HydraShield now? Who was the woman behind it? Heard she quit. I think they fired the wrong person. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but everyone was digging. Engineers aren't easily fooled. They recognized the personal fingerprint in the code, the function structures, the variable naming conventions, even the data formatting. Everything screamed the original developer's unique style. I checked my old LinkedIn account. Not logged in, but I noticed my profile views had skyrocketed, nearly 6 times more in a single week. A few anonymous emails came to my personal inbox, each one a mix of curiosity and admiration. Are you the one behind HydraShield? I'm researching a similar framework. Is there any chance I could learn from you? I didn't respond. I didn't want to get emotionally pulled into a battle that wasn't over yet. But I kept watching. NovaForge stock began to slide. At first 3%, then 6%, then almost 30% within 14 days. Financial forums started calling it a quiet exodus. A few smaller investors publicly questioned leadership about their technical competence. But the scariest part was this: they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. The system wasn't functioning properly anymore, but no standard diagnostics could explain why. I knew why. Because I had designed HydraShield as a dynamic system. It adapted to user behavior, to time, to access frequency, and included hidden variables that existed only in the core version I kept private. Without understanding the original behavioral architecture, any interference would just make things worse. I had warned Brian about that in a meeting back when the company was expanding into the European market. We need to segment security protocols by region, I had said. If you just copy the current framework without someone who understands its behavioral design, it will break. Brian had scoffed. You're overthinking. What you wrote isn't artificial intelligence. But he was wrong. What I built wasn't just lines of code. It was a living, breathing system that operated on trust between creator and user. And now, with me gone, it no longer recognized anyone as its master. A message from Carla came just as I was finishing my last sip of coffee on a gloomy morning. NovaForge just requested a meeting. Off the record. Seems like they're starting to feel the pressure. I stared at the phone screen, strangely calm. Maybe because I'd been preparing for this moment since the day I was cut out. But deep inside, something still ached. Not because they were falling, but because the creation I once nurtured was now being treated like outdated machinery, just because they refused to understand it. And maybe they were about to pay a far higher price than they ever imagined. I was fixing a few lines of code for an internal security system for a small logistics company in Oregon when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not saved in my contacts, but familiar. I didn't pick up right away. Watched the screen light up 3 times, then fade. I waited a bit, almost as if I were giving the past a moment to be ashamed of itself. Finally, a message appeared. Juliana, this is Liam McCarthy, the new CTO at NovaForge. I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time. I leaned back in my chair, fingers paused above the keyboard. Liam. I remembered him. Not someone I was close to, but not someone I disliked either. The type who nodded at every executive decision and kept quiet about everything else. A skilled engineer, but not brave. I typed a short reply. We can talk after 4 p.m. I'm currently working for your competitor. Less than a minute later, he called. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hi, Juliana. His voice came through, polite but tight. I know this might be inconvenient, but we're really struggling. I figured, I said, turning my chair slightly to let the light hit my desk. And I'm not sure I'm the person who can help you now. He sighed. HydraShield is in chaos. The new consultants can't work with your code. They don't understand the internal logic, can't reinitialize the verification variables. Every attempt to adjust the core structure creates more bugs. That's not surprising, I said calmly. It wasn't designed to be patched together by strangers. He went quiet. I let the silence stretch before asking, specifically, what do you need from me? We'd like to bring you on as a special advisor, for 4 weeks, to help stabilize the system. High compensation, 6 figures. All terms will be clearly documented. You can work remotely. No need to return to the office. I pressed my lips together. 6 figures. For many, that would be a life-changing offer. For me, it was just financial language dressed up to disguise a desperate SOS. I'm afraid I can't, I replied. I'm currently committed to a major contract with one of your direct competitors. I don't think a short-term collaboration would be ethically or legally appropriate. Liam paused for a few seconds, then lowered his voice. I understand. But Juliana, there's something else I think you should know. I recently found out that Brian told the board that the core security tech was a joint company development. That no individual had exclusive rights. I know that's not true. My heart slowed. You know that. I reviewed all early correspondence between you and Brian when you joined the company. There's one email where you clearly state HydraShield was a framework you wrote in college. Brian replied with a single sentence. I don't care who wrote it as long as it works. I opened my eyes. Can you send me a copy of that email? I've already forwarded it to our in-house legal team. But if needed, I can send it with server logs. Before I could respond, Liam rushed ahead. And one more thing. Carla Jameson is your attorney, right? I think you should talk to her immediately. I just received word that Brian is secretly negotiating to sell HydraShield's rights to a Chinese firm. The deal is in pre-contract stages. I froze. As much as I'd braced myself for the worst, I hadn't expected him to go this far. Are you sure? Asked, my voice lower. The tip came from someone inside the legal team. They believe the company holds the IP rights, so Brian has authority to negotiate. But if what I read in your old email is accurate, this could be far more complicated. I hung up after confirming that Liam would forward all related content. No promises were made. But I knew the game had shifted. I immediately called Carla. She answered on the second ring. I just got word from NovaForge, I said. Brian's trying to sell HydraShield to China. Carla's voice was cold steel. I just received a leaked internal email. Looks like we'll need to act sooner than expected. I stared at my computer screen. The code was still there. The lines I'd written over 3 years, one by one. They weren't just technical output. They were pieces of me. Proof that I built my career with my own hands. What do you want me to do? I asked. Carla responded without hesitation. For now, don't say anything to them. But I need you to send over the original files, including timestamps and the GitHub activity logs. If there's any sign of an illegal overseas transfer, we'll be working directly with federal legal authorities. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I'll send them within the hour. After hanging up, I sat alone in the quiet room. Outside it had started to drizzle. That familiar Seattle rain. But it felt like a warning of a much bigger storm. And even though I hadn't wished for it, I was ready to step straight into its eye. It took me 2 days to organize everything, but in truth, I'd been preparing for years without realizing it. Every line of code I wrote, every commit I made to GitHub with precise timestamps, every email exchanged with Brian before we even had an office. Each one had become a perfect piece in an undeniable puzzle. I didn't want to hold a flashy press conference. No big stage, no blinding cameras. All I needed was a room with decent lighting, a stable connection, and people willing to hear the truth. On Saturday night, I rented a small seminar space in Fremont. It could hold about 40 people, mostly tech journalists, 3 former colleagues who had quietly left NovaForge, and a few independent engineers I'd worked with on recent freelance projects. I sent private invitations to each of them with a short message. There's something I need to share. A story about technology, integrity, and greed. The meeting began at 10 p.m. Once everyone had taken their seats, laptops open, eyes fixed on me in anticipation, I stood behind a plain table. No microphone, no flashy slides. Just the familiar GitHub interface projected behind me. I started speaking slowly, a slight lump in my throat. My name is Juliana Brooks. 6 years ago, I wrote the first line of code for HydraShield, the security system that now forms the backbone of NovaForge's operations. But recently, I discovered that this technology is being sold overseas under someone else's name. And I've decided, I won't stay silent anymore. The room was so quiet I could hear someone typing in the front row. I projected a log from my personal GitHub, clearly timestamped December 18, 2017. My account name. The original source code appeared along with the note. Initial prototype. Multi-layer authentication logic test. Then I showed an email pulled directly from NovaForge's internal server. Subject: bringing HydraShield into project. It was a thread between me and Brian. In it he wrote, "I don't care who wrote it as long as it works." Those words appeared on screen like a slap. I continued, my tone calm but clear. Technology has no ethics. The people who build it do. And if no one speaks up, everything we've created can be taken and sold like nothing. I'm not standing here to reclaim a career. I'm standing here to reclaim the truth. A young journalist from TechScope raised her hand. Do you have any proof that NovaForge is trying to sell the license overseas? I nodded. Yes. I've handed over all the internal negotiation documents, including emails and early contract drafts, to my attorney. They'll be delivered to the proper federal authorities tonight. Another voice asked, "Aren't you afraid of being sued for leaking internal information?" I looked around the room, my voice dropping slightly. NovaForge might claim I violated an agreement. But what kind of agreement allows a company to take a developer's work and sell it off like a commodity? If exposing the truth comes at a cost, I'm willing to pay it. When the meeting ended, someone I didn't recognize came up to shake my hand. He introduced himself as the technical director of a nonprofit supporting female engineers. "You didn't just do this for yourself," he said. "You're opening a path for so many others." I smiled gently. I just don't want the next generation to stay silent the way I once did. A clipped live stream of the talk went viral on Twitter within hours. A popular tech account with nearly 2 million followers reposted it with the caption, "This is why intellectual property is sacred." 2 days later, the video had over 3 million views. The press dubbed me the engineer who shook the system with 6 years of silence. But what concerned me more was the call from Carla on Monday morning. "The Department of Defense is now involved," she said. "They've issued a formal request to investigate NovaForge. There's evidence of illegal tech transfer and deception in their IP filings." I sat by the window, early sunlight streaming through the blinds. I didn't feel triumphant. There's no joy in exposing someone you once worked alongside. But I did feel lighter. I could breathe as myself, not as the ghost behind someone else's slide deck, not as the name removed for brand alignment. I knew it wasn't over. But at least the truth had been spoken. And once truth has a voice, it doesn't stay buried. I didn't expect to see Rebecca Langley again, certainly not under these circumstances. That evening, when the doorbell rang around 8 p.m., I assumed it was a neighbor asking for sugar. But when I opened the door, there she stood, neatly styled silver hair, beige trench coat, eyes unwavering. Rebecca Langley, NovaForge's lead investor, once featured on Forbes Tech Power as the capital architect of a generation. "Apologies for showing up unannounced," she said, her voice low but steady. "But I believe we need to talk. Privately. Now." I paused, then stepped aside to let her in. She entered without hesitation, set her purse on the chair by the fireplace, and glanced around my simple apartment. "I watched your press meeting," she began. "And I believe it's time the board hears the full story. From you." I sat across from her, meeting her eyes. "I'm ready to provide all necessary evidence to the DoD. But if you're suggesting I return to NovaForge—" "Not as an employee," she cut me off. "As someone who holds the key to the company's survival. Tomorrow morning, the board is convening an emergency session. I want you there. And I want you to speak." I didn't answer right away. What flashed through my mind wasn't code, but an old image of my father hunched over his drafting table, whispering to himself, "Success doesn't need applause. But honor doesn't accept silence." The next morning, I returned to NovaForge headquarters, the building I once considered my second home. I wore a plain white shirt, hair pulled back. Carla walked beside me, her expression cold, carrying a large document case. As we passed through the lobby, heads turned. Some people I'd worked with looked down, avoiding eye contact. Others, mostly younger engineers, stood up straight, eyes wide. No one spoke. But silence can say a lot. The meeting took place on the 7th floor, the same room I was once excluded from. Today every seat was filled. Alongside Rebecca were 3 board members, heavyweights from major venture capital firms. Brian was also present. His eyes flicked to me with a strange mix of disbelief and unease, but the confident smirk was gone. "Thank you for coming," Rebecca said as I sat down, Carla beside me. We want the unfiltered truth from you. I opened my laptop and plugged into the projector. The large screen behind me lit up with the GitHub interface, displaying the very first commit. December 18, 2017, initial prototype. Multi-layer authentication logic test. This is the original source code for HydraShield, I began. Written 6 months before I received NovaForge's invitation. I clicked over to the email folder. A conversation popped up, between me and Brian, dated May 2, 2018. Brian wrote, I don't care who wrote it as long as it works. He knew perfectly well that this system was something I built on my own, I continued. I clearly stated its origin when I began integrating it into the product. And yet, for the past 6 years, my name hasn't appeared in a single technical document the company has released. One of the board members, Mr. Charles Hoover, furrowed his brow. Brian, is that accurate? Brian adjusted his tie, trying to stay composed. Juliana may have written the initial version, but the product as it exists today is the result of a full team's effort. The current code has undergone extensive revisions. I agree, I said. I've never denied others' contributions. But the core, the part that enables behavior-based dynamic authentication, has remained intact. And it's that core that makes the system unique. At that point, Carla opened her briefcase and pulled out copies of emails, GitHub logs, and even a handwritten letter from one of my former professors verifying that HydraShield had been a research project I directly developed. Rebecca silently reviewed each page, then said slowly, Brian, did you present HydraShield as an internal NovaForge innovation when securing the Series B round? Brian was at a loss for words. We invested based on what you described as a breakthrough in-house technology, she continued. And now I see, that breakthrough didn't come from you. Charles Hoover leaned back in his chair, his expression laced with disappointment. I propose the board immediately review the leadership status of our technical division. Rebecca nodded. I second that. We cannot retain someone who has knowingly obscured IP ownership and placed this company at legal risk. After a swift vote, the decision was finalized. Brian was asked to resign, effective immediately. I sat silently, not triumphant, just quietly somber, as though a storm had just swept through a place I had long guarded in memory. Rebecca turned to me. For the first time that meeting, her gaze softened. Juliana, we would like to appoint you interim CTO and grant you equity proportionate to the value of the technology you've contributed. Do you accept? I looked at Carla, then back at the screen where the original code still glowed like a quiet reminder. I accept, I said calmly, on one condition. From this point forward, every technical document must properly credit the creators of the core system. No one has the right to be erased from history. I returned to NovaForge on a Monday morning, the sky unusually clear after days of steady rain. The glass doors at the front still looked the same, my reflection faint against the backdrop of company logos. But I wasn't walking in as someone excluded from meetings. I was stepping in as interim CTO under one condition. The truth would be upheld and no one, not even me, would be above transparency. A full company meeting was held on my first day back. I didn't stand on a stage or read from a prepared script. I sat at eye level with the team, looking directly at the same faces that had once looked away or stayed silent. I didn't come back for revenge, I began, my voice steady but firm. I came back because what we built once was worth being proud of. And I believe we can build it again with the respect it deserves. I instructed the legal team to release a complete timeline of HydraShield's development, from concept to commercial launch, with full credits to every contributor at each stage. No more erased names. I also proposed a major change, an internal open repository of all technical documentation, with transparent access across teams. Any changes to core code would now require approval from a technical board, not just one decision maker. Some worried this might slow us down. I looked at them and said, better slow and sound than fast and broken. But the real work began when I returned to the engineering floor, the realm of quiet code and persistent bugs. I reopened the old personnel list. There were people I remembered sharing nothing but cold sandwiches with, trading them for ideas that changed how the system worked. I called them one by one. No long speeches, just an invitation to come back. Ethan was the first to say yes. If you're leading, I'm in, he said, and brought along 2 cybersecurity students he'd been mentoring. I started visiting regional tech meetups, speaking with recent graduates in cybersecurity. I wasn't looking for perfect GPAs. I wanted people who listened to code like it was a living language. Within a month, a new NovaForge engineering team had taken shape. Half were returning veterans, the other half first-timers finally given a chance. I sat with them once a week, not to manage but to remind them that ownership isn't just about names on paper. It's about how we treat the work we create. We began rebuilding HydraShield, not because it was flawed but because it had been altered so many times it had lost balance. Ethan and I spent nearly 2 weeks working late into the night, reconstructing the behavior-based authentication model into a more flexible, layered system that could adapt across client environments without rewriting the core. In our 6th week, a message arrived from the Department of Defense. They were considering reactivating their pilot contract with NovaForge. I printed the email, didn't circulate it, and quietly folded it into my desk drawer. "You're not sharing that with the team?" Ethan asked, noticing I hadn't mentioned it. "We're not done," I replied. "You think one pilot contract means we've succeeded? I'll believe it when the system runs clean for at least 6 months." Ethan smiled. Still the same Juliana from 6 years ago. I didn't disagree. But now I'd learned something new. I don't have to carry everything alone. Step by step, through engineering syncs and customer feedback emails, I watched NovaForge come alive again. For the first time in years, user complaints dropped below 1%. Our behavior analysis engine began autonomously optimizing data structures to fit different usage environments. And when clients returned, not because they were swayed by marketing but because they believed in the product, I knew we were on the right path. One morning, Rebecca showed up at the engineering office unannounced. She stood silently watching the team for nearly 10 minutes. When I stepped out, she simply nodded and said, "Thank you. I invested in technology, but the real asset is the person who steers it." I didn't respond immediately, just smiled. In that moment, I realized justice isn't about pushing someone out. It's about building a space where everyone is truly seen for their worth. And that's what I would keep doing. 3 months later, the spring morning sun poured through the massive windows of NovaForge's new event hall. On stage, a clean white banner read, "Reignite. Rebuild. Recognize." Over 200 guests sat quietly under soft lighting. Press, engineers from partner firms, investors, and tech students from 3 universities in the region. Today, NovaForge was launching the next-generation security platform, an extended version of HydraShield. It no longer belonged to one name. It was the product of a team that built it together, and were all recognized for it. Backstage, I held my note cards without looking at them. Everything I needed to say had been inside me for years. Rebecca walked over and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to say it all," she said. "You've already proved your point." I turned to her. "I'm not saying it to prove anything. I'm saying it because someone out there is listening, and they need to know they're not alone." The theme music played softly. I stepped into the spotlight. The applause was steady, not loud, not forced. Just the right kind of honest. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Juliana Brooks. 3 years ago, I wrote a small piece of code in my bedroom. That was the first step of HydraShield. Back then, I never imagined it would become the foundation of a multimillion-dollar company. I just wanted to create something that could protect data, and protect myself." I paused for a moment, my eyes sweeping across the back rows where a group of students sat. A young woman with curly hair was scribbling furiously in her notebook. I saw my younger self reflected in her eyes. I was once erased from the product I created, pushed out of the very team I helped build. But I'm not sharing this to complain. I'm telling it because I know there are many people in this room, and out there, who've been treated like shadows behind the very things they helped build. I turned to the screen, which now displayed a simple slide, HydraShield, from solo code to shared legacy. I don't need anyone to give me justice. I made it happen myself. Through preparation. Through silence at the right moments and speaking up when it mattered. By refusing to stay down when others tried to push me under. This time the applause grew louder. I stayed calm. In my heart, I thought of my younger brother, Nathan, who passed away the same year I received my full scholarship to college. Nathan once asked me late one night as we lay on the rooftop gazing at the stars, Do you think computers can feel sad? I had laughed and said, no. But the people who build them do. Nathan was the reason I chose technology. He always believed I could create something extraordinary with my own two hands. And today I couldn't stand here without mentioning him. I'd like to announce, I said, my voice steadying, Nova Forge will allocate 5% of this year's profit to establish the Nathan Brooks Fund, to support female engineering students from disadvantaged backgrounds who want to pursue tech. Because we don't just need talent, we need motivation, especially in a field still riddled with invisible barriers. I glanced at the front row, where Carla was nodding gently, her eyes filled with a pride I hadn't seen in anyone since my mother passed. The product launch ended in a warm, hopeful atmosphere. I didn't head back to the office right away. Instead, I slipped into a quiet hallway in the back. There I opened my phone. An unread email sat in my inbox. From Derek Simmons, subject, a belated apology. I stood there for a while, my fingers hovering over the screen. The message was only a few lines. Juliana, I was wrong. In work and in the way I treated you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know, I understand now. I read it again. I wasn't angry. I wasn't surprised. Just a quiet stillness I didn't need to explain. I hit archive. I didn't delete it, but I didn't respond either. Some apologies don't need to be answered, just acknowledged quietly, like a period at the end of a closed chapter, so you can move on without looking back. I stepped out into the garden path, the afternoon sun casting a golden hue across the tiles. A few young engineers were seated around a picnic table, discussing security protocols for a new machine learning platform we had just partnered with. They laughed, scribbled notes, and looked up as I approached. CTO, one young woman spoke up. Do you think two-factor authentication should be device-based or user-based? I sat down beside them without hesitation. That's a great question, I said. But first, tell me what you're thinking, and then let's walk through the options together. Because justice doesn't live in the executive office. It starts with how one engineer chooses to listen to those coming after them. And I will continue to listen. What do you think about this story? Have you ever been undervalued, pushed aside, even though you were the one who created something meaningful? If one day your work was taken from you with no credit, would you stay silent? Or stand up for yourself? I don't have a one-size-fits-all answer. Everyone finds their way through pain and reclaiming worth differently. But I believe when we share our stories, whether they're about failure, heartbreak, or resilience, others will see themselves in them. And sometimes, a moment of empathy can change a life. If this story made you reflect, if you've ever felt something similar in your own family, career, or journey, leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you, because who knows, it might just be the beginning of another story we'll tell together. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories to come, where we'll explore the hidden struggles within families, the quiet battles we fight, and the inspiring paths to healing that life so often offers.